So I heard you're ready to bake sourdough bread. I just wanted to share with you a few things that you'll need to get started. Okay, pretty simple. Let's talk about the basics. The first thing you're gonna need is some water and flour. I prefer to use an unbleached and not enriched flour. So it's a very clean flour. It just has the grain in it. This one has unbleached hard red wheat flour, and that's it. So this is a bread flour, but you could use all-purpose. I tend to use the King Arthur ones. You do not have to use this brand, but I do love them. I usually keep all-purpose and bread flour both on hand, so you might want to do that too, but this tends to be my favorite one to use. Okay, you'll need a jar. Any glass jar will do, something that you can put a loose lid on. When you're starting in the beginning and you're just making that starter, and it's going to take about 2 weeks for it to get to a good place that you're actually ready to bake with it, you could just use a jar like this. It does not have to be a large jar. Like this is, you know, a medium-sized jar. I think it's like 12 ounce, maybe a 12 or 14 ounce jar. This is perfect. Now, after it's ready to start baking with, and you're going to be using bigger quantities of your starter, you can upgrade to a bigger jar, but you don't need one in the beginning, so this is perfect. I use a plastic lid and just set it on top. So after I mix my starter, it has a little bit of, breathing room, so it's not screwed on all the way. You're just gonna let it sit on top, and this is actually perfect for your starter to live in like this. You could use other things. Some people like to cover theirs with a coffee filter and put a rubber band on top. Others use like a cloth of some kind. This just tends to be what I use. So that's pretty simple. And then you'll need something to stir it with. So a wooden spoon works great, or you could use a plastic or silicone spatula. You could use metal. Stainless steel is great, but if it is a metal one, you might want to steer away from that and just try to stick with something that's more neutral, that's not going to affect the enzymes or the probiotics in your starter. Okay. Another thing you're going to want to have is a kitchen scale. If you don't have one, don't worry, just order one on Amazon real quick, okay? It'll get to you in a couple days. These are very inexpensive. You could also find one at maybe Walmart and the craft store. It is going to be essential for you with baking. There are recipes that use, cup measurements, but most recipes for sourdough baking are done using a weight measurement. So you're going to want a kitchen scale, and it's going to make everything more exact. Okay. This is not necessary, but I do like to have this on hand. I put my flour in here so that I can sprinkle it into my Banneton baskets, which is another thing I was going to show you, or sprinkling it on the table whenever you're shaping your dough, things like that. You don't have to have this item, but it is kind of nice to have. And then you could totally use a kitchen knife, but a lame. This has got a bread lame. There's different variations of them. I have 2 different ones here. Again, these are things that you can totally get off of Amazon, and they take these razors that you can buy like by the 100 pack that is actually really reasonably priced. So after a few uses, you're gonna toss this blade and get a new blade on there, and it'll be nice and sharp for scoring your bread. So I love these. And then another item I love is a Danish dough whisk. I ordered this on Amazon too. You don't have to have this fancy tool. It's actually not super fancy. It's pretty simple, but it really does help mix the dough really well and help incorporate it. You could just totally use your hands. You don't need anything to mix it with if you don't want to. When this is dirtier, I can't find it. Sometimes I'll just use one of these from my kitchen mixer. So, everything doesn't have to be bought. You could find things around the house. Like for example, mixing bowls. Bannetons you don't necessarily need. You could use a bowl that you have around your house, okay? You don't have to have one of these, but these are great. And I have 2 different styles here. This one has a cover that you can put, you can keep the bread in the cover, or you could take the cover off. And when you do that, your bread will actually get an imprint from this basket, which is kind of cool. So those are just a couple fun things to have on hand, but any bowl works well. And then a Dutch oven, the other thing that's sitting right in front of me. You're going to want one of these. You don't have to have one of these. Again, this is something that's like, you could totally go without this and bake just on either a pizza stone or, whatever kind of baking sheet, and instead use like a steam method where you can put water or ice in the oven underneath whatever you're baking on. But with this, it uses its own steam by having this lid on top. When you're baking your bread with the lid on, it's basically trapping its own steam from the moisture that's inside the bread. So that's why I love this. It's just super simple. I have several different sizes of these. This one's a 3.5 quart one. I use this sometimes, but I have to say I use my 6 quart one way more. It's almost double the size, and that one is my favorite for baking bread. Okay, last but not least, some parchment paper just for putting the bread on. So when you take it out of this basket, I pull out a sheet of parchment paper, place it over top, I flip this over, and then I have my dough that I can work with and score it right on the table here. And then I lift the parchment and put it into my Dutch oven before I bake it. And then one more thing, you don't have to do this, but one thing I like to do to avoid a really crispy, hard crust on the bottom is I like to pour a little bit of dry rice in the bottom of my Dutch oven. I do have some handy right here. I keep it in a mason jar near the stove, so I can just sprinkle some in, and I make sure it's just a nice, I'll usually shake this a little bit to make sure it's a nice even layer, and then place the parchment lined loaf in here and then bake it. So those are the basic things you need, but really to get started with your starter, the first couple things you need are just the jar, the flour, water, of course, and a kitchen scale, and then just something to mix it up with, okay? And then you have 2 weeks or so to get the rest of your supplies gathered, okay? So just worry about the flour, water, and jar, and the kitchen scale, and you will be off to a great start. I'm so excited to help get you started with your sourdough baking. Please send me any